I was 79 when the chest tightness came. Not the kind you see in movies, no dramatic collapse, no gasping for air or clutching the heart. Just a slow, heavy presence right behind my sternum, like someone had placed a warm stone there and told it to stay. It was a quiet morning. I remember the way the sunlight came through the curtains, stripes of pale gold on the kitchen table. I just made tea. Earl Grey. Always Earl Grey. I reached for the spoon, and that's when I felt it. Tightness, yes, but also a strange fog climbing up my arms. Not pain exactly, not fear, just wrong. And I'll tell you what nearly cost me everything that day. Pride. I didn't want to be one of those people calling for help over a maybe. I'd lived through war, through burying friends, through building a family and watching them leave. I'd stood up straight through things that would make a younger man fold. And yet, I almost let that foolish voice in my head convince me to wait it out. That was the first mistake I nearly made, thinking time was on my side. You see, when you're older, the body doesn't raise alarms the way it used to. It whispers. It negotiates. It asks nicely before it begs. That soft pressure in the chest, that moment of dizziness you chalk up to skipped breakfast, is not always innocent. Sometimes it's the beginning of goodbye. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the spoon in my hand, thinking maybe I was just anxious. Maybe the tea was too strong. Maybe I was overthinking. We tell ourselves that a lot, don't we? That we're imagining things, that we're being dramatic. But I'll tell you something I've learned in these quiet years. Your body doesn't lie, and when it does speak, especially in age, it does so for a reason. Could have waited. I could have poured the tea and tried to distract myself. But something deeper, something older than fear, said no. I reached for the phone. Now, that brings me to the next thing I've seen too many of my friends do. They hesitate to call for help because they don't want to bother anyone. I had a neighbor, Margaret, lived 2 doors down. Lovely woman, made the best peach preserves I've ever tasted. She once felt tightness in her chest while watering her garden. But she didn't call anyone, didn't want to trouble her daughter, didn't want the paramedics making a fuss. By the time they found her, the garden hose was still running. Margaret was my age. She just didn't want to be an inconvenience. That's the second mistake. Thinking your life is less important than someone else's peace. We spend our whole lives looking out for others. We raise children. We care for spouses. We take the late shift, the hard job, the long route. And somewhere along the line, we start to believe our own needs are secondary. That asking for help is selfish. That needing care makes us weak. But there's nothing noble about silence if it steals your chance to survive. So I made the call. And do you know what the voice on the other end said? Thank you for calling. Help is on the way. Not judgment. Not exasperation. Just calm. I put the phone on speaker like my grandson taught me so I wouldn't have to hold it to my ear. That small detail might seem trivial, but it let me sit still, let me breathe. I'd made it over the first hurdles, recognizing something was wrong and asking for help. But even then, there were more decisions ahead. Decisions I had to make alone. I knew I had aspirin in the kitchen drawer. I'd kept it there for years, after my doctor gently insisted I always have it nearby. Not the coated kind, just plain old aspirin. I reached for it, took a single tablet and chewed it slowly. Tasted like chalk and bitterness, and it shook in my hand. But I knew why I had to do it. A friend of mine, Harold, didn't know that trick. His heart seized up one afternoon, and though he'd called 911, he'd just sat waiting. No aspirin, no relief. He survived, but barely. The doctors told him that single tablet could have cut the damage in half. That's the third mistake, not being prepared for the silence. Because that's what it is when you're alone during a heart attack. A deep, stretching silence. There's no one there to remind you what to do. No partner rushing to help. No child calling from the other room. It's just you and the decisions you made before the moment came. That aspirin, that simple little pill, is a lifeline, but only if you know where it is and only if you're willing to trust it. So I sat, speakerphone on the table, aspirin melting in my mouth, and tried to slow my breathing. Not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I knew panic was a thief. It robs your strength. clouds your judgment. It makes you stand when you should sit, talk when you should breathe, collapse when you should endure. I remember closing my eyes, counting each inhale and exhale. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Again and again. The room felt a little less tilted. My hands a little steadier. Funny, isn't it? At 80, you learn that your breath is one of the few things that still listens when you ask. I stayed in that chair for what felt like forever. The sun had moved slightly, just enough that the stripe of light had slid from the kitchen table to the floor. I remember watching it, wondering if the paramedics would arrive before that light reached the wall. It's funny what your mind does when time becomes something you can feel, ticking inside your chest. I didn't move much, just sat there, hands open in my lap, eyes on the light. The aspirin had dulled the pressure a bit, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Either way, I wasn't about to get up. See, that's another trap we fall into when we're older, thinking we have to stay in control even in crisis. I've always been the one who fixed the leaky faucet, who drove my wife to every appointment, who shoveled snow well into my 70s, just to prove I still could. But in that moment, the greatest act of strength was staying still. I didn't try to tidy the house. I didn't fetch a glass of water. I didn't even reach for the curtain to get more light in the room. I just stayed. And that stillness saved me. Because had I stood up, had I pushed through that moment like I used to, I might not be here to tell you this now. I remember my friend Wallace, a big man, bigger heart. He once told me he felt chest pain while in the garage. But instead of stopping, he finished what he was doing. Cleaned up his tools, turned off the radio, walked back to the house. He made it to the couch before passing out. He didn't wake up. Sometimes we treat pain like an inconvenience instead of a signal. We want to keep the illusion going that we're okay, that we're capable, that we're not fragile. But the truth is we are. And that's not weakness. That's just the honesty of old age. Now, the front door, that was a tricky one. It was locked as usual. I've always been careful about that. Living alone, you tend to develop routines. But as I sat there, hard unsteady, I realized something. If the paramedics arrived and couldn't get in, that would be precious time lost. So I had to choose, risk getting up, or hope they could break through fast enough. I listened to my breath again, counted 3 full cycles, and when I felt just steady enough, I stood. Slowly, one hand on the chair, the other on the table, shuffled toward the door like a man crossing ice. Every muscle in my body felt 10 years older. But I made it. I unlocked the door, left it ajar just enough, and made my way back to the chair. That's when I thought of something else. Something I nearly forgot. People can't help you if you don't let them in. Not just literally. I mean in every sense. We spend our youth building walls of strength. But when the body begins to falter, what we need most is openness. Vulnerability. Access. Unlocking that door wasn't just about wood and metal. It was about surrender. Trust. Saying yes to being saved. You know, when my wife was still alive, she used to say, "You're so good at helping everyone else, but terrible at letting anyone help you." She was right. I wore independence like a badge. Thought needing anything was a kind of defeat. But now I see it differently. Needing help doesn't diminish your dignity, completes it. And speaking of help, if you're still here listening to this old man ramble, let me know, will you? Leave me a comment down below. Tell me if the story stirred something in you. Tell me if you've ever had one of those quiet moments where your body whispered something important, and whether or not you listened. I read every message. They remind me that I'm not really talking into silence. Now, where was I? On my phone. I'd left it on the table, speaker still on. I could hear the dispatcher checking in now and then. "Sir, are you still with me?" I'd answer with a quiet yes. She had the kind of voice that made you feel safe. Calm but alert, like a lighthouse keeper in a storm. And then she said it. "They're just a few blocks away. Stay where you are." Just a few blocks. But those minutes, they felt eternal. It was during that wait I noticed how tight my grip had gotten on the chair. My knuckles pale. Breath a little too fast. Heart still dancing its strange, unsteady rhythm. So I closed my eyes again and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. For seconds in, 6 out. It didn't fix the pain, but it gave me a rhythm that wasn't panic. A thread to hold on to. In a world that had just shrunk to one small kitchen, one old chair, and a ticking heart, I held on to that breath like a rope out of the dark. People think courage means doing something big, but sometimes it's just choosing not to panic when everything in you wants to. That breath, it wasn't just oxygen. It was a message to myself. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still waiting for the knock on the door. And that knock did come. A hard, hurried sound, followed by voices. "Mr. Carson?" they called. "It's the paramedics. We're coming in." The door creaked open, and 2 men in uniform stepped inside like angels in boots and latex gloves. One of them knelt beside me. The other checked his watch, his radio, his bag. It all happened fast. But I remember the one who took my hand. He said, "You did everything right, sir. You're going to be okay." And in that moment, I felt tears. Not from fear, not from pain, but from relief. Because for once in my life, I'd let others take the wheel. The ride to the hospital was a blur. They loaded me gently into the back of the ambulance, strapped me down with care. The one holding my hand kept talking to me, asking for my name, the year, how I was feeling. Not because he didn't know it was a way to keep me anchored, keep me awake. I remember telling him about the tea I never got to drink. He smiled, said I'd earned a fresh cup when this was over. Strange. The things that comfort you in moments like that. Not big things. Not even prayers, always. Sometimes it's just the sound of a voice beside you, or the smell of antiseptic and leather. Sometimes it's just knowing someone else is there to carry the weight. They wheeled me in through the back entrance. I saw the lights overhead flashing past, white after white after white. Somewhere in there, they stuck something in my arm. Someone said, "Mild elevation." Another voice said, "Stable for now." All I could do was breathe. At some point, a nurse asked me, "Do you have any allergies? Are you on blood thinners? What medications are you taking?" That's when I remembered my phone. I'd set up the medical ID a few months earlier. My grandson had insisted. I didn't think much of it at the time, just something to appease him. But now, lying there, I told the nurse, "It's all on the phone. Left side pocket." She pulled it out, tapped the screen, swiped to the emergency tab. "Got it," she said. "Good man." That one little step, setting up that ID, may have saved me from being given something harmful. And I wouldn't have been able to speak up if I'd passed out before I arrived. You see, one of the easiest mistakes we make as seniors is thinking we'll always be conscious, always able to explain ourselves. But sometimes the body has other plans. The hospital was cold, but my heart had settled into a steady beat again. They monitored me for hours, ran tests, blood work, EKGs. At one point, I think I drifted off. Not the sleep of peace, more like the body's way of lowering the lights to conserve power. I woke up to a cardiologist standing at the foot of the bed. Quiet man, kind eyes. He said, "Mr. Carson, you had a minor heart attack. You did the right things. You probably saved your own life." I nodded, not out of pride, just exhaustion. He told me about the damage, minimal, thank God. Told me there'd be changes, of course. Diet, medication, lifestyle. I said I understood. What I didn't say was that the real change had already begun. Not in my arteries, in my understanding of time. I'd always thought of time as something that stretched ahead. Retirement, vacations, afternoons on the porch. But now it felt different, like something measured in breaths, in seconds, in decisions made while alone in the kitchen. A few days later, I was discharged. My daughter drove me home. She fussed over me, of course, hovered like I used to when she had the flu as a child. I let her. There's grace in receiving, I've found. Took me a long time to learn that. And then came the quiet. Home again. Same armchair. Same windows. The same light falling in the same stripe across the same table. But everything felt different. Because now, I knew just how close I'd come to disappearing into that quiet forever. I spent those first days thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I hadn't recognized the signs? What if I hadn't called? What if the door had been locked? What if I didn't have aspirin? What if the phone had been out of reach? But the truth is, I had everything I needed. Just barely. And not by luck, by quiet preparation. That's when it hit me. Most people don't prepare for being alone during a heart attack because we never think it will happen to us. We think we'll have time. We think someone will be there. We think it only happens to other people. But when you're over 70, 80, time becomes a more fragile thing. And company becomes a privilege, not a guarantee. So I started thinking about how to make things easier, if there ever were a next time. I moved a small container of aspirin to my nightstand, another to the drawer near the couch. I bought a smart lock for the front door, one my daughter can unlock from her phone, just in case I can't reach it. I practiced the breathing again, just in case my hands are too weak to hold the phone, but I need something to keep me calm. I even added a second emergency contact to my medical ID, not because I'm afraid, but because I've been given the gift of perspective. I don't believe in living in fear. I believe in living in truth. And the truth is, if you're a senior, especially if you live alone, you don't get to assume someone will be there. You have to be there for yourself first. That's not sad. That's not tragic. It's just the way of things. And there's quiet power in meeting that truth with preparation instead of panic. I don't tell you all this to scare you. I tell you because I've seen how quickly the seconds can slip through your fingers when your chest tightens and no one is around to notice but you. And I've seen how much life can return if you act quickly enough. A few weeks after I came home, I sat in the garden for the first time since the heart attack. It was early evening, cool air, the smell of tomato vines, a breeze just strong enough to rustle the hydrangeas. My neighbor's wind chimes were singing something slow and sorrowful, and there I was, still breathing, still alive. But there was something else now, a quiet awareness I couldn't shake. Not fear exactly, more like alertness, as if some part of me had been woken up by that moment in the kitchen and now refused to go back to sleep. I noticed every flutter in my chest, every skipped beat, every moment of lightheadedness after bending down. And that's when I stumbled into another mistake, one I hadn't expected at all. I started ignoring new symptoms, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to bother anyone again. You see, once you survive a heart attack, people begin to treat you like glass. And in return, you start trying to prove you're not. My daughter would call every night. My grandson sent me a smartwatch to monitor my heart rate. The neighbors brought casseroles. Even the postman asked how I was doing. It was kind. It was overwhelming. And part of me, the part that still wanted to be strong, started pretending I felt better than I did. There were days my chest felt tight again, just a little. Days my heart fluttered at rest. But I said nothing, brushed it off, drank more water, took a nap, told myself it was probably nothing. That's how subtle it is, this mistake of minimizing what matters. After a while, you begin to distrust your own body. Or worse, you tell it to quiet down. But the truth is, your second heart attack doesn't care how well you handled the first. I was lucky. Those fluttering days passed. They turned out to be side effects from a new medication. But they could have been something else. And by trying to spare others worry, I almost robbed myself of care. I've learned that silence isn't strength, especially when your life might depend on breaking it. I now keep a notebook by the bed. I write down anything unusual, however small. Not to obsess, but to track patterns. To stay curious about what my body is telling me. You'd be surprised how often the truth speaks quietly before it screams. There's one more thing I did during those first months of healing. And it may sound simple, but it might be the most important of all. I practiced asking for help before I needed it. I called my daughter and said, "If something ever happens again, I want you to know where the spare key is, what medications I take, who my doctor is, and what to say if you have to speak for me." She cried when I said it, not because it was morbid, but because it was clear, kind, responsible. I made a little folder, printed out my emergency info, tucked it in a drawer marked, "just in case." That drawer gave me peace, not because I planned to use it, but because I'd rather face the truth than hide from it. That's something age has given me, the ability to stare straight at the hard things and not blink. Younger people think planning for emergencies means you've given up. But when you're 80, you know it's the opposite. It means you've chosen to honor what time you have left, instead of pretending you have forever. And let me tell you about loneliness. Not in the poetic sense. Not in the rainy window cup of tea kind of way. I mean real loneliness, the kind that creeps into the house with the evening shadows. The kind that sits across from you at dinner. The kind that shows up in the quiet after your children have gone home and the door clicks shut. That kind of loneliness is what makes heart attacks in old age so dangerous. Not just because no one's around to see it, but because we start to believe that maybe it wouldn't matter much if no one did. That's the deepest mistake of all, the one we don't talk about. The one we carry like a secret weight in our chest. We confuse solitude with insignificance. We start to measure our worth by how often the phone rings. We look at empty rooms and think, maybe I'm already fading. But we're not. You're not. The day I had my heart attack, I was alone. But I was not unloved. I was not forgotten. I was not useless. And neither are you. You listening to this now, you still matter. Your breath still matters. Your story, your memory, your quiet rituals, they still carry weight in the world. So prepare, yes. Learn the signs. Keep your aspirin nearby. Set up your phone. Breathe through the fear. All of that matters. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is this. Your life is still worthy of being saved. And no emergency call, no unlocked door, no whispered plea for help is ever a burden to someone who loves you. Sometime after the heart attack, I was sitting with my oldest friend, Thomas. We go back nearly 70 years, met in the army, made it through battles that left quieter scars than the ones doctors can see. We were on his porch, two old men in folding chairs, wrapped in blankets like kings. He looked over at me, gave a little chuckle and said, "You know, it's strange, isn't it? How close we come sometimes." I knew what he meant. He'd had his own scare the year before, different from mine but just as serious. A stroke, mild but cruel, took the words right out of his mouth for a week. They came back, thank God, but softer, more deliberate, like everything in him had slowed down to listen. That day on the porch, he reached over, tapped his fingers on my chest and said, "You're still ticking. That counts." And it does. It counts more than most people realize. When you're young, surviving feels like a default setting, something automatic, expected. But in old age, survival becomes something sacred. Conscious act. A rebellion against the odds. I've thought about that moment in the kitchen many times since. The sunlight on the table. The cold sweat. The decision to call. The aspirin. The door. The breath. Every single choice made in solitude added up to a life still unfolding. I could have ignored the signs. I could have waited too long. I could have told myself it was indigestion, fatigue, a passing spell. I could have locked the door, misplaced the phone, forgotten the aspirin, panicked instead of breathing. Each of those little decisions, each mistake I nearly made, could have been the one that tipped the scale. But I was lucky, and maybe a little wiser than I used to be. That's what I want to leave with you now. Not just a list of tips, not just survival instructions, but something deeper, a kind of quiet readiness. Not paranoia, not anxiety, just a gentle agreement with yourself to stay here as long as you can, with dignity, with preparation, and with a certain tenderness toward your own body. Because the body, as worn and stubborn as it may be, is still trying its best to keep you alive. It wants to stay. And you're still allowed to want that too. Even if the world around you grows quieter. Even if your knees ache, your eyesight fades, your phone doesn't ring as often. Even if your name isn't called in every room anymore, you still belong here. And if the moment ever comes when your heart falters in the middle of an empty room, don't let silence be the thing that swallows you. Let it be the thing you rise from. Know what to do. Have the aspirin. Set up the emergency ID. Practice the breathing. Keep your phone within reach. Unlock the door if you can. Tell someone where the key is. Write your medications down. And most of all, don't talk yourself out of asking for help. You may think you're just one old man, one old woman, in one quiet house. But you're not. You're a library. You're a storm survived. You're a voice someone still needs to hear tomorrow. And if you're ever faced with a moment that threatens to take all that away, remember that you have more power than you think. Maybe not to control everything, but enough to stay, enough to hold on, enough to keep breathing through the dark. I don't know how many more mornings I have left. None of us do. But this one, I woke up, made tea, sat down with this old heart of mine and told it, we're still going. And if you'd like to return, if these words have meant something to you, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere. I'll be right here, telling stories to the silence, until you walk back in.